I stood beneath a gray sky, rain sliding down my black umbrella, the sound of it mingling with the soft murmur of prayers. My father's casket rested beneath a white canopy, a splash of lilies covering the polished mahogany. Daniel Carter, gone at 61. The man who taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, how to breathe through fear, how to stand on my own. I should have been thinking of him, of everything he'd meant to me. But all I could see was my mother's smile. Evelyn Carter, immaculate even in grief, pearls at her throat, not a single hair out of place. She fluttered around the mourners like a hostess at a cocktail party, dabbing her eyes just enough to appear heartbroken. I tried to keep my distance, to let her play her part, but when she spotted me, her expression shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by that familiar glint of superiority. She stepped closer, the scent of her perfume sharp, and leaned in so no one could hear. "You don't deserve a penny from the will," she whispered, lips barely moving. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. My throat closed, my pulse hammering in my ears. "What?" I breathed, but she just smiled, a small, cruel curve of satisfaction. "You heard me," she said, straightening her coat. Then she turned away, greeting the next mourner as though she hadn't just gutted me in the middle of my father's funeral. I stood frozen, the world tilting beneath me. My grief twisted into confusion, then disbelief. What did she mean? My father wouldn't have done that to me. Not him. As the priest's voice droned on, her words echoed in my head, cold and deliberate. "You don't deserve a penny." I clenched my fists, swallowing back the sting of tears. My father's coffin lowered into the earth, and while everyone else bowed their heads, I stared at my mother. Her expression was serene, smug even, like a queen watching her victory. Something inside me hardened that day. Grief gave way to something sharper, a need to understand, to uncover what she'd done. Because if my father had left me nothing, there had to be a reason. And I was going to find it. Growing up, my mother's love was like fine china, delicate, expensive, and never meant for everyday use. Evelyn Carter thrived on appearances, the kind of woman who measured her worth in whispered compliments and polished silverware. Our house in Westport gleamed, not a speck of dust or imperfection allowed, and yet beneath its shine, everything was brittle. My father, Daniel, was the opposite, quiet, grounded. He fixed what broke and never cared who noticed. When he'd sneak me out for pancakes at the diner before school, we'd talk about simple things, dreams, books, how he wanted me to live without fear. "Don't let her shrink you, Rachel," he'd say, eyes kind but tired. "You were built for more than keeping the peace." I didn't understand then what he meant, but I do now. My brother Ethan was the sun in my mother's orbit. 2 years younger, effortlessly charming, always the favorite. He got away with everything, skipping classes, wrecking Dad's car, draining credit cards, and she'd still call him her brilliant boy. When I earned my first promotion, she barely blinked. But when Ethan remembered her birthday, she wept like he'd moved mountains. I used to think if I worked harder, I could earn what he had. I got straight A's, scholarships, a master's in finance. I built my career brick by brick. But no accomplishment was ever enough for her. She called me cold, ungrateful, too ambitious. Words that sounded like insults, but felt like projections. Still, Dad saw me. He came to every graduation, every late-night call when work felt too heavy. He'd tell me, "Pride isn't selfish, Rachel. It's survival." When he got sick, I was the one who handled his appointments, his medication, the endless hospital forms. Mom showed up for photo ops, the devoted wife in her designer scarf, but never stayed long. Even near the end, Dad squeezed my hand and whispered, "You'll be fine without me, but watch her." Now, standing at his funeral, I finally understood. His warning wasn't about grief. It was about her. Evelyn Carter had always seen me as a threat, not a daughter. And if she truly believed I didn't deserve a penny, then this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A week after the funeral, I found myself sitting in a mahogany-paneled office that smelled faintly of leather and old money. The rain outside drummed against the windows, matching the pulse in my throat. My mother sat across from me, legs crossed neatly, her black gloves resting in her lap like she was attending another performance of her own making. Beside her, Ethan slouched, phone in hand, pretending boredom while soaking up the attention. I couldn't stop staring at the portrait behind the attorney's desk. A calm, middle-aged man staring out at a stormy sea. It reminded me of Dad, and the ache in my chest deepened. The attorney, Mr. Q. Briggs, cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses before reading from a stack of documents. The last will and testament of Daniel Carter. His voice was low, steady, but every word felt like a blow. He listed small bequests first, donations to charities, tokens for old friends. Then he reached our names. To my son, Ethan Carter, I leave the family home and its contents. Ethan leaned back with a satisfied smirk, tossing a quick glance at Mom. Mr. Briggs continued, to my wife, Evelyn Carter, my remaining financial assets and investments. She nodded once, as if she'd earned it. My palms were slick with sweat when I heard my name. And to my daughter, Rachel Carter. He paused, looking directly at me, his expression unreadable. Nothing. The word hit like a punch to the ribs. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Ethan's phone clattered to the floor, and even he looked surprised. Mom didn't flinch. Her lips curved into that same subtle, poisonous smirk she'd worn at the funeral. I told you, she whispered under her breath, so soft only I could hear. My stomach turned, but before I could speak, Mr. Briggs raised a hand. However, he said, shuffling the papers, there is an addendum. A sealed document, handwritten by Mr. Carter himself, to be opened only under specific conditions. My heart stumbled. Evelyn's smirk faltered just slightly, but she recovered fast. And what conditions are those? She asked, her tone cool. Mr. Briggs folded the document carefully. That, he said, will be explained when the time is right. I sat there in stunned silence, my father's voice echoing in memory. Watch her. Maybe he hadn't left me nothing after all. Maybe he'd left me the truth. Mr. Briggs's office felt colder the next morning when I returned, the sky outside a pale, washed-out gray. The sealed envelope sat on his desk like it held a heartbeat. My mother and Ethan were already there, her posture regal, his expression smug again after a night of celebration. Let's not drag this out, Evelyn said, folding her hands. My husband's wishes are clear. Rachel doesn't get anything. Mr. Briggs didn't answer right away. He slid a document across the table and adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, before this can be unsealed, you both must sign here, acknowledging you've agreed to open it jointly. Evelyn's brows lifted. Jointly? He nodded. Your husband specified that the addendum can only be revealed with both your signatures. Refusal means it remains sealed indefinitely. Silence. Then a sharp laugh escaped her. Daniel was always sentimental. I'm sure he meant well, but this isn't necessary. My son and I have already accepted his will. Are you refusing to sign? Briggs asked, his tone formal but firm. Yes, she said without hesitation. Ethan shrugged, mimicking her. Guess that's that. I stared at them both, disbelief burning in my throat. You're refusing to honor Dad's final words? You don't even want to know what he left?" Evelyn's eyes flicked toward me, cold and gleaming. "Your father changed his mind long before the end. He told me as much." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not true." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Rachel, he was disappointed. You were always distant. He didn't want conflict." Lies rolled off her tongue like silk. I stood, my chair scraping hard against the floor. "If that's what you need to tell yourself, fine. But I know Dad better than you ever did." She smirked, unbothered, and turned back to Mr. Briggs. "We're done here." I walked out into the parking lot, the air sharp against my skin. My father's will had been turned into a weapon, but deep down I knew this wasn't over. The way he'd left that sealed letter, the condition, the secrecy, it wasn't coincidence. He'd hidden something from me, something only I was meant to find. And I was going to find it, no matter what it cost. 2 nights after the will reading, I drove to my father's old workshop. The place had always been his refuge, tucked behind our house, where the scent of cedar and engine oil lingered no matter how many years passed. The padlock was rusted, but the key on my old keychain still worked, clicking open with a metallic sigh. I stepped inside, flipping the light switch. The single bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows over his tools, perfectly arranged on the pegboard. Dust coated everything, but it still felt like him, patient, meticulous, quietly strong. My throat tightened. I moved through the space slowly, fingers trailing along his workbench. That's when I saw it. His old red toolbox, scuffed and dented, tucked beneath the bench. Something about it drew me in. I pulled it out, heart pounding. The latch was stiff, but when it popped open, the top tray rattled aside to reveal a small, sealed envelope resting on top of a folded cloth. My name was written across it in his handwriting, steady, deliberate. Rachel. My breath caught. I sank onto the stool and tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, the paper slightly yellowed, his familiar scent still clinging faintly to it. "If you're reading this, sweetheart, I'm gone. I need you to know this. I never stopped believing in you. You've always been stronger than you think. I worried Evelyn would twist things when I was no longer here. She's built her life on appearances, and I knew she'd try to control what came next. So I made sure there'd be something only you could find. The key enclosed opens the truth." My fingers brushed a small brass key taped to the bottom of the page. "Go to the downtown branch of Wells and Everett Bank. Safety deposit box 314. Everything you need is inside. Trust your instincts. I love you always, Dad." The words blurred as tears spilled down my cheeks. He'd known. He'd seen this coming and left me a path through it. I clutched the key in my palm, the metal warm from my skin. For the first time since his death, I felt him close. Not gone, just guiding me. I looked around his workshop, the space he'd built with his hands, and whispered, "I'll find the truth, Dad. I promise." Then I locked the toolbox, tucked the letter in my coat, and stepped out into the night, my grief replaced with purpose. The next morning, I drove downtown through a gray mist that matched my mood. Wells and Everett Bank stood like a fortress of glass and stone, the kind of place where silence felt expensive. I clutched the brass key in my pocket, its edges pressing into my palm as if to remind me this wasn't a dream. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, reflecting the pale light that streamed through the tall windows. A young teller greeted me politely and guided me to a private room after verifying my ID. My name was on the record. Daniel Carter had listed me as the secondary holder. That realization made my throat tighten. He'd planned this down to the smallest detail. The security guard escorted me to the vault. The walls were lined with hundreds of boxes, rows upon rows of locked metal secrets. Box 314 waited halfway down the aisle. My hand shook as I slid the key in. It turned smoothly, clicking open like it had been waiting for me. Inside was a small stack of folders, a few old photographs, and a black USB drive labeled in my father's neat handwriting, Evelyn's Deals. Beneath it all, folded carefully, was a single sheet of thick paper, a property deed. My breath caught when I read the name, Rachel Carter. The address below made my heart stop. It was the lake cabin we used to visit when I was a kid, the one I thought he'd sold years ago. I could still remember him teaching me how to skip stones there, the sunlight on the water, his laughter echoing through the trees. He'd kept it. For me. My eyes moved back to the USB. Evelyn's Deals. The phrase made my stomach twist. I glanced through the folders, bank statements, transaction records, handwritten notes. Each one pointed to something ugly. Forged signatures, secret transfers, money siphoned from joint accounts. My mother's name appeared again and again. Dad had known everything. He'd documented it, hidden it, and trusted me to uncover it when he was gone. I stared at the USB, the weight of what it might contain sinking in. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about the truth and the lies that had rotted our family from the inside. I packed the contents back into the box, locking it carefully. As I left the bank, the morning fog lifted slightly, sunlight breaking through in thin, golden threads. My father hadn't left me with nothing. He'd left me with power, and now I knew exactly what to do with it. That night, I sat at my desk with the USB drive plugged into my laptop, the room lit only by the soft glow of the screen. For a long moment I hesitated, my father's handwriting on the label staring back at me, Evelyn's Deals. My heart pounded as I double-clicked the folder. A series of files appeared. Spreadsheets, scanned documents, PDFs with account numbers and signatures. My breath hitched. I opened the first one. The numbers made my stomach twist. Property sales, wire transfers, offshore accounts. Each transaction told a story. Assets disappearing under my father's name, funds rerouted into shell companies that led straight to Evelyn Carter. Line after line, the truth unfolded in cold digital ink. My mother had been selling off pieces of the family estate for years, funneling the money through Ethan's accounts to keep herself clean. In one folder labeled Valley Oaks, 2019, I found a signature that didn't look quite right. I zoomed in, comparing it to others. My father's name, Daniel Carter, looped just slightly wrong, the D uneven, the ink heavier. Forged. She'd forged his signature. My throat tightened as I clicked through the rest. There were dozens of documents, some dating back almost a decade. She'd been bleeding him dry behind his back, all while playing the devoted wife in pearls. I scrolled until I reached a file titled Final Statement. Inside was a note my father had written to himself. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stop her. I kept quiet to protect Rachel. She deserves better than this ugliness, but the truth will outlive me. Tears blurred my vision. He'd known. He'd carried this secret for years, letting her destroy their finances piece by piece, staying silent because he didn't want me caught in the crossfire. My father had been trying to protect me, even as his own world crumbled. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fury and grief tangling in my chest. Evelyn had stolen from him, stolen from us. I thought of her smirk at the funeral, her calm at the will reading. She'd orchestrated everything, counting on his silence and my absence. But she'd underestimated him and me. My hands trembled as I unplugged the USB and slipped it into my coat pocket. The truth was out now, and I wasn't going to bury it. She wanted a war. I'd give her one. By morning, the fury had hardened into resolve. I drove to my childhood home with the folder of printed documents in the passenger seat, my father's words echoing in my mind. "Don't let her shrink you, Rachel." The house looked the same as always. White shutters, manicured hedges, perfection on the surface. I rang the bell, and when the door opened, my mother's smile faltered for the first time since the funeral. "Rachel," she said, voice clipped, "what are you doing here?" I stepped past her without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Ethan was in the kitchen, cereal bowl in hand, wearing the lazy grin I'd hated since we were teenagers. "Wow," he said. "Someone's dramatic before noon." I ignored him and placed the folder on the counter. "I know what you did," I said, staring straight at my mother. "Dad knew too." Evelyn's brows arched, amusement flickering across her face. "You'll have to be more specific, dear." I opened the folder, sliding out the pages, bank transfers, property deeds, and the forged signatures. "You sold off family assets using Dad's name. You laundered money through Ethan's accounts." Her expression froze, the blood draining from her face for just a second before she laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "That's absurd." Ethan glanced at the papers, then at her. "Mom, what is this?" "Lies," she snapped, regaining her composure. "Fabrications. Rachel's always had a flair for drama." I shoved a document toward her. "Don't lie to me. These are your transactions. Your signature's right there, next to Dad's forged one." Her jaw clenched, but her eyes betrayed her. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. Ethan stepped forward, puffing up like he was protecting her. "You probably faked this yourself. You've always been jealous, Rachel. Dad trusted me." His words sliced deeper than I expected. I turned to him, voice low but shaking. "He trusted you because he didn't know she was using you as a shield." "Enough!" Evelyn's voice cracked like thunder. "Get out of my house." The room pulsed with silence. I stared at her, the woman who'd built her life on control, now cornered. "It's Dad's house," I said quietly, "and he'd be ashamed of you." I gathered the papers, my hands trembling but steady enough to hold on to the truth. As I walked toward the door, she called after me, her voice cold and hollow. "You'll regret this." I paused, looking back only once. "No," I said. "You will." Then I left, the front door slamming behind me, her perfect world beginning to crack. I spent that night barely sleeping, pacing my apartment with the folder spread across my dining table. Every page felt heavier than the last. Numbers, signatures, proof of betrayal. I needed someone who'd believe me. Someone who had known my father beyond the walls of our house. That's when I thought of Henry Lowell. He'd been Dad's closest friend and business partner for over 20 years. The kind of man who kept his promises and remembered details others overlooked. I still had his number saved from years ago, back when he and Dad would come by for weekend barbecues, their laughter echoing through the yard. My thumb hovered over his contact before I finally hit call. "Rachel?" His voice was warm but cautious. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I said, my throat tight. "Henry, I found something about Mom." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before he sighed. "I was wondering when you'd call." We met the next morning at a quiet cafe downtown. He looked older, gray hair, heavier lines, but his eyes were still sharp. I slid the folder toward him, watching his face as he flipped through each page. He didn't look surprised, only sad. "He suspected this," Henry said finally. "Your father came to me last year, said he'd found irregularities in their joint accounts but didn't want to confront her outright. He feared she'd drag you into it." I clenched my hands, anger simmering beneath my ribs. He stayed silent to protect me. Henry nodded. That's exactly what he said. But he didn't leave you unprotected. He pulled out a small stack of papers from his briefcase and set them beside mine. Your father created a contingency trust, one that activates only if proof of Evelyn's misconduct surfaces after his death. I was named witness to it. My breath caught. A trust? For me? For you, Henry confirmed, his tone gentle but firm. He wanted you to have what's rightfully yours. The assets in the trust include the lake cabin and a portion of his investments, ones Evelyn doesn't know about. I blinked, overwhelmed. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because he wanted you to find it when you were ready. Henry hesitated, then slid an envelope across the table. These are copies of his letters to me, written weeks before he passed. He was preparing for this. I opened one, recognizing my father's steady handwriting. If Evelyn tries to rewrite the truth, Rachel must have the tools to fight back. I swallowed hard, emotion thick in my chest. Henry's eyes softened. He trusted you, Rachel. He always did. And if this goes to court, I'll testify. Your father's plan was clear. I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me, grief turning into determination. For the first time, I had allies, evidence, and purpose. My father hadn't left me alone in the dark after all. He'd left me a map, and I was ready to follow it. By the end of the week, I'd hired an attorney. Her name was Amelia Torres, and from the moment she walked into my office, she radiated quiet authority. Sharp eyes, crisp suit, no wasted words. She listened as I laid everything out, the will, the sealed addendum, the forged documents, and Henry's testimony. When I finished, she leaned back, steepling her fingers. This isn't just fraud, she said. It's premeditated manipulation. Your father tried to protect you, and now will protect his legacy. She moved quickly, filing motions to unseal the addendum and freezing any remaining assets tied to Evelyn. Her calm confidence steadied me. Let them make the first move, she said. Ma, we'll be ready. And they did. Within days, Evelyn and Ethan's lawyer filed a counterclaim, arguing that my father had been mentally unfit when he signed the documents. Reading it made my stomach churn. Evelyn's words were laced with venom even on paper, painting me as a greedy daughter twisting my father's memory for money. Ethan's statement echoed hers, full of rehearsed outrage and lies. I forwarded the documents to Amelia, expecting her to be furious. Instead, she smiled faintly. Good, she said. They're overplaying their hand. At the first hearing, Evelyn arrived in pearls and practiced grief, clutching a handkerchief like an actress on cue. Ethan flanked her, jaw tight, pretending loyalty. I sat beside Amelia, heart pounding but posture straight. When the judge asked for evidence of mental unfitness, Amelia stood, her voice even but razor sharp. Your Honor, the defense's claim collapses under their own timeline. We have authenticated financial documents signed by Mr. Carter after his alleged decline, and these signatures are genuine. She turned toward Evelyn, eyes steady. However, the ones tied to the asset transfers are not. The courtroom murmured as she projected the side-by-side comparisons onto a screen, the original signatures versus Evelyn's forgeries. Even from across the room, I saw my mother's face pale. Furthermore, Amelia continued, we have records showing substantial transfers from Mr. Carter's accounts to those of his son, Ethan Carter, initiated by Mrs. Carter without his knowledge. She let the silence hang. Evelyn's lawyer stammered objections, but Amelia cut through them like glass. We also have corroborating testimony from Mr. Henry Lowell, Mr. Carter's business partner, who can verify his competence and intent in creating a contingency trust for his daughter. The judge's gaze hardened. By the end of the session, Evelyn's performance had crumbled. Ethan avoided her eyes, his earlier arrogance replaced by unease. As we stepped outside the courtroom, Amelia handed me a copy of the preliminary ruling. "We've secured the first win," she said, her tone calm but proud. "The addendum will be opened." I looked down at the document, my hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from something else. Justice. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Never let them make you small." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Amelia." She nodded once. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "This is just the beginning." The final hearing felt like stepping into a storm I'd been walking toward my whole life. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as I took my seat beside Amelia. My mother sat across the aisle in her signature pearl necklace, a portrait of elegance, her face smooth and unreadable. Ethan lounged beside her in a navy suit that looked borrowed, his bravado dimming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. What followed was a slow unraveling. Amelia began her questioning with precision, her voice calm but unrelenting. "Mrs. Carter, can you explain why several assets were transferred into your son's account without your husband's signature?" Evelyn's smile didn't waver. "My husband trusted me to handle our finances," she replied smoothly. "We shared everything." "Including his signature?" Amelia asked. The words hung in the air like a blade. Evelyn's composure flickered. "I don't know what you mean." Amelia projected a screen of enlarged signatures, the real ones and the forgeries. "These were analyzed by a handwriting expert," she said. "Your husband's authentic signatures differ in 14 distinct ways from the documents tied to the transfers." A murmur rippled through the room. Evelyn shifted in her seat, fingers tightening around her handkerchief. When Amelia turned her attention to Ethan, he avoided her gaze. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you received nearly $400,000 in transfers from your father's accounts. Were you aware those funds originated from forged documents?" Mom handled all that," Ethan stammered. "I just thought it was part of the estate plan." "So you benefited," Amelia pressed, "but never asked why your sister received nothing?" He hesitated, his voice cracking. "Dad didn't want her to have anything." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Or is that what your mother told you?" The judge leaned forward, expression hardening. Evelyn tried to interject, her voice sharp. "My husband was confused. He wasn't well." But Amelia calmly produced another file. "This is a letter Mr. Carter wrote 2 weeks before his death," she said. "Would you like me to read it?" Evelyn froze. Amelia began reading aloud, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "To my daughter Rachel, if you're hearing this, it means I failed to protect you from your mother's influence. I've stayed silent too long, hoping she'd change. I was wrong. Know that my love for you was never conditional. You were my pride, my peace, and my redemption." The room was silent except for the sound of Evelyn's sharp intake of breath. Her perfect posture crumpled. "He was lying!" she shouted suddenly, her voice breaking. "She stole him from me. She turned him against me." Her words echoed across the courtroom, raw and desperate. The judge's gavel slammed once. Ethan buried his face in his hands, and in that moment, the mask Evelyn Carter had worn her whole life, of grace, of control, of superiority, shattered completely. The final decision came 3 weeks later. I sat in the same courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Evelyn and Ethan looked smaller somehow, both pale, hollow-eyed, stripped of their certainty. The judge's voice carried through the silence, deliberate and steady. "After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, this court finds that Daniel Carter's final addendum stands as legally valid." My breath hitched. All misappropriated assets will be restored to the rightful beneficiary, Rachel Carter. The words sank in slowly, like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. Amelia gave me a small nod, her calm expression hiding the satisfaction in her eyes. The judge continued, "Furthermore, Evelyn Carter and Ethan Carter are found liable for the fraudulent transfers. They are to repay the misappropriated funds and relinquish all claims to the Lake Haven property." The gavel struck. It was over. Evelyn didn't look at me. She sat frozen, her pearls gleaming against her ashen skin. Ethan muttered something under his breath, but I didn't hear it. My pulse roared in my ears as the reality set in. The cabin, my father's haven, my childhood refuge, was mine again. Justice, long delayed, had finally found its voice. Yet the victory carried weight. As we stepped outside, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. Reporters hovered nearby, but Amelia shielded me, guiding me toward the car. "You did it," she said softly. "Your father would be proud." I looked down at the document in my hand, my name inked beside his. "He already was," I whispered. That night, I drove to the lake cabin. The sun dipped low, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. Inside, everything smelled of cedar and memory. I found his old fishing hat hanging by the door, right where he'd left it. For a long time, I just stood there, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. The fight had cost me nearly everything. My family, my illusions, my peace, but it had also given me something far greater. Truth. I lit a small fire in the hearth, the flames dancing in the reflection of the window. Outside, the lake shimmered under the first stars of evening. I whispered into the stillness, "We're okay now, Dad." For the first time in months, I believed it. The lake cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, half hidden behind tall pines that whispered in the wind. The first time I returned, weeks after the verdict, I barely recognized it. The place that had once been overrun with silence and cobwebs now looked alive again. Freshly painted shutters, a new roof, the scent of pine and varnish hanging in the air. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my boots, and for a moment, the world went still. This was where my father and I had spent summers fishing, fixing the dock, and watching thunderstorms roll across the lake. It was where I'd learned that quiet could be sacred, not empty. Now, it felt like coming home. Inside, sunlight poured through the windows, dancing across the wood floors. I moved slowly, touching the edges of furniture I hadn't seen in years. Everything felt familiar yet distant, like visiting a dream I'd half forgotten. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, exactly how it used to when Dad would wake before dawn to fish. I ran my fingers over the shelves, tracing the grooves in the wood, until I found an old tackle box tucked beneath the window seat. Inside was a folded photo, faded, edges curling with age. I held it carefully, my chest tightening. It was me, no older than 10, standing on the dock beside Dad, a fishing pole in one hand and a fish barely larger than my arm in the other. He was behind me, smiling, proud and sunburned. On the back, in his familiar handwriting, were 5 words that made my knees weaken. "Never let them make you small." My breath caught, and before I knew it, tears spilled freely. I sank onto the floor, clutching the photo to my chest, the sound of my sobs mingling with the quiet hum of wind through the trees. It wasn't the jagged grief that had haunted me for months. This was something softer, an uncoiling, a release. For so long, I'd carried anger like armor, using it to survive. But sitting there, surrounded by everything he'd left me, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the day he died. Peace. The sun dipped lower, streaking the lake in gold. I whispered to the empty room, voice trembling, "I'm okay, Dad. I promise." And for the first time, I meant it. The months that followed passed quietly but with purpose. The lawsuit had drained me, but it also reshaped me. I no longer woke with dread, no longer felt like I was fighting invisible battles. I started spending weekends at the cabin, restoring what time and neglect had taken. I sanded the walls, painted the trim, and replaced the broken window panes myself. Every nail, every brushstroke felt like a conversation with him, like I was rebuilding more than just a house. I was rebuilding myself. Back in the city, my career as a financial consultant flourished. But something inside me had shifted. The world felt wider now, less about profit and more about purpose. I sold a portion of my inheritance and used it to create the Daniel Carter Foundation, a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for single parents and underprivileged students. Dad had always believed knowledge was freedom, and I wanted to pass that on. Watching the first group of students complete their workshops filled me with a pride deeper than any corporate success ever could. I kept the cabin as my sanctuary. Every few weeks, I'd drive up alone, bringing my laptop and a notebook full of ideas. I'd sit on the porch with coffee, watching the sunrise shimmer across the lake, and let the quiet fill me. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was clarity. I'd framed that old photo of us fishing and hung it above the fireplace. His handwriting, "Never let them make you small," became my mantra, a reminder of everything I'd survived and everything I'd built. Sometimes I'd think about my mother and brother. Rumors said they'd sold the family house and moved out of state. I didn't reach out, and they didn't try to find me. Some wounds don't need reopening. But the ache they left behind had dulled into something manageable. A scar, not a chain. One evening, as twilight deepened and the lake reflected the last traces of light, I sat on the dock with a cup of tea and whispered, "We did it, Dad." The water lapped gently against the wood, and a single firefly drifted past, glowing soft and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was living. Fully, freely, and finally whole. The lake was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that feels sacred. Mist drifted across the water like a soft veil, catching the first light of dawn. I stood at the edge of the dock, wrapped in my father's old flannel jacket, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The cabin behind me glowed with soft amber light, smoke curling from the chimney. It felt alive now, restored, safe, mine. For a long time, I just listened. To the water, to the wind through the trees, to my own heartbeat finally steady after months of chaos. This was peace. Not the kind you find by avoiding pain, but the kind you build after walking straight through it. I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the courtroom, the tears that seemed endless. My mother's cruelty, Ethan's betrayal, my father's quiet faith in me. Every piece of it had led here, to this moment. I took a deep breath, the air cool and sharp against my lungs, and let the truth settle inside me. When I spoke, my voice was calm but certain, carrying softly over the water. "Family can wound deeper than strangers," I said, "because they know where to cut. But your worth isn't theirs to measure. My father gave me more than money. He gave me truth, and truth set me free." The words echoed back across the lake, merging with the ripples. I smiled faintly, setting the mug down beside me. I could almost feel him there, sitting on the edge of the dock like he used to, watching the sunrise in silence. It wasn't grief anymore. It was gratitude for everything he'd taught me, for every piece of strength he'd left behind. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.